lot about fixed costs and variable costs in a lot of digital age research. And I think for people who are trained in a way that uses analog age methods, you sort of think about the world one way, and I hope this can help you sort of get to think about the world in this other way. And I think a key is thinking about fixed and variable costs. So this is, you could call this experiments at scale. So I went to Stanford a little while ago, and everyone, they were like, I'm studying da-da-da-da at scale. It's like anything they were doing, it had to be at scale. So this is about experiments at scale. And the key to getting up to this big scale without running out of money is having low variable cost. So analog experiments generally are relatively easy to start, but then if you want to double your number of participants, you pay twice as much. Digital experiments, much harder to start, but then each additional participant is basically free or much less expensive. So the main costs in experiments that I think about are staff time and participant payment. And so if these are the main sources of variable costs. So you want to drive both of these to zero through automation and replace your staff, and designing enjoyable experiments to reduce the payment. So this story I talked about at the beginning of the book that Musiclab was running while I was sleeping, like if your experiment can run while you're sleeping, then you've eliminated all sources of variable cost, which is really cool. And a key, you notice I've talked a lot about not wanting to pay people. Not because I don't want to pay, I'm happy to pay people, but like even better is to create something they want to do. And I thought a little bit more about that, and I'll talk about why in the Musiclab in particular I think that was important, even though it may not be as important for other kinds of experiments. So this is Musiclab. So we heard a little bit about how to archive experiments so other people can use them and see how they work. One sad thing about Musiclab is I can't run it anymore. Like the code runs on some 2000 some Arab version of some web server that doesn't exist anymore. It's basically, it now only exists in pictures, which is kind of sad. So there is a technical solution to this now, supposedly called virtual machines, where you can like create an image of your server circa whenever you're doing your dissertation experiment. And then supposedly that will continue to work 5 years from now and 10 years from now. I don't know how well that actually works in practice, but it seems like a good idea. If you think about documentation, rather than having these pictures, a cooler form of documentation would be download this virtual machine, and then it should just work on your machine right now. So with the Open Review Toolkit, for example, that's all inside of a virtual machine. So that should be much... we'll see in practice, but we're trying. Okay, so this is what people saw. So one thing is, it is very clear that this is a scientific study, right? There's some, people knew they were in a research project. So after people clicked on this, there was an informed consent. Then there was a survey collecting some basic demographic information, and then they were taken to this screen where they were presented with a list of 48 songs by up-and-coming artists, and I'll talk more about the selection of these songs in a second. They could click and listen to whatever they wanted. Then they were asked to rate it on a scale of 1 to 5 stars. Then they were asked whether they would like to download it or not, and then they were taken back to this listening screen. And they could do this as much as they want or as little as they wanted. That was the design and the user experience. So we actually were not particularly interested in this rating information. We put that in there because we wanted people to think that's what we were focused on, but we were much more focused on the download decision. And so when I talk about why I don't like paying people in experiments, I should have been slightly more careful, which is I like experiments that are, I don't know, it's not the right word, but incentive compatible, in the sense that people are, their behavior, what kind of behavior you're interested in and kind of what they want to be doing are the same. So like if we paid people to be in Musiclab and they were just rating the songs, I would be much less interested in their ratings. But here, I was interested in their downloading behavior, which is a real behavior that they were doing because they thought it was good for them. And so here's a setting where I would be okay with paying people, is in these kind of competitive games, like Prisoner's Dilemma or Public Goods or whatever, because there you're paying people for the kind of behavior you care about. But what I think is bad is like paying people for a survey, and then they kind of just do the survey and they don't really care. They have no reason to exert effort kind of in the kind of effort you're interested in. So here, like, we know why these people are doing this, or we think we know that they're doing it because they want to get music. Also about the design, we talked some before about front end and back end development. So I want to acknowledge the two people that helped build this. So one is Peter Housel. So he did all the back end development, and then he built a front end, and it looked not like this. And so we realized we can't go with this. We need to, when you do an experiment like this, you're really competing against the best designers in the world. Like this was maybe not, I wouldn't say this competes with the best designers in the world, but circa 2005, this was what web design looked like. And so people who are going to be in your experiments, if you do them like this, they are going to spend their time on Facebook, Google, the New York Times, things like that. And those companies have the best designers in the world. Like, those are beautiful websites. And so if you want to create a beautiful website, then either you have to be incredibly talented yourself, or you have to have found this magic unicorn developer who knows all about SQL databases and knows all about colors, or you have to have a front-end person. And so here again, I think is an advantage of working with a web development company, because they have front-end people and back-end people who work together a lot. Because if you're going to try to find each of these people and then get them to know each other and work together, it's hard. So now about the choice of the songs. So this actually involved web scraping. Actually, you might not. So a lot of the activities that we encounter carry over from day to day. So the web scraping I had to do here was, we thought a lot about what songs to put in here. So here it asked me about why these songs, or why not other songs. So what we did not want is, we didn't want songs that people had already heard of. We didn't want things like Britney Spears or Justin Timberlake. Those were popular back in those days. Because they already come with lots of ideas about those things. So we wanted the only information they have to be basically this, the information that we provide to them. This is an idea that's common in kind of experimental economics, which is you want to be really careful about what people are bringing with them into the study. So they try to make sure, if you read a lot about how they do their designs, it's like they try really hard to make sure no one is bringing anything with them. So in these studies where like you interact with people, they try very hard to make sure the people are completely anonymous and don't know each other at all, because if the people know each other, then they're bringing in all this other stuff. They're bringing in a bunch of baggage. So you want to make sure people leave everything at the door, kind of. And so that is the idea with using these relatively unknown songs. But then, if you go and try to find a bunch of songs that aren't very popular on the internet, they're pretty bad usually, right? And so if you want this to be a good user experience, which again, because people aren't doing this for money, you need to have. So the solution that we came up with was, there's this website called purevolume.com, and that was a place, it was kind of like before MySpace, where bands would post their music. Now, if you take a random sample of bands on purevolume.com, a lot of very bad stuff. And I don't actually believe in some abstract notion of quality in music. I mean, just like poorly recorded. Then, but they had a separate thing that cost $10 a month to host more songs and stuff like that. So those were reasonably serious bands. And those we took, so then I had to write a scraper to pull down all of those and then randomly sample from it. And then contact those bands asked for their permission to use their music. Most of them agreed, but not all of them. So in the paper, in the supporting online materials, there's stuff about the approval rate of the bands and so on. So that is where we got the music. It became clear to us afterwards that this is an important kind of unadjusted parameter in the experiment. So if the bands had more similar appeal, the results might have been different. If the bands had greater variability in appeal, the results might have been different. So in some ways, this was actually really a key parameter, the variance of the appeal of the songs, that we sort of didn't set intentionally. We had it set sort of by nature. There's, I guess, trade-offs in that. But that's the story of the bands. And then also to check to make sure that people didn't actually know the bands, we actually got consent from 51 of the bands, and then only 48 are here. We ended up then showing the other 3 on a survey to ask people whether they had heard of this band or not. Now, of course, everyone reports that they've heard of the band, so we added in a fake band called Peter on Fire, because Peter was the web developer. And people reported having heard of Peter on Fire as much as they reported hearing of these other bands that were in the sample. So another thing, actually, another sort of important parameter that we kind of realized afterwards, we kind of knew, but I think now more, the number of songs is a really important parameter. And so why did we end up with 48 songs? Because I think if there were 48,000 songs, the results would be much stronger. That's my speculation. If there was just 4 songs, the results would not be as strong. So because we wanted there to be no scrolling, that was why this was like the most we could fit on a screen without scrolling. So it's kind of a strange reason to end up with 48, but that's how it was. So this is the design that the participants were not, this is what the participants saw, this is what was happening in the background. They came and they were either assigned into an independent condition or a social influence condition. And then here they were randomly assigned into one of these 8 parallel worlds. So it's like putting people in a room. They can see what other people in their room had done, but not what people in the other rooms had done. So you can see to what extent these groups that all are comparing the same songs, starting from the same initial conditions, with indistinguishable participants, to what extent these parallel histories diverge, and then how that compares to what would happen in a world where people are making their decisions independently. So the main comparisons are across these worlds, and then comparing this independent condition to these social influence conditions. So we actually did 2 experiments in the first paper, and then we did 2 more in other papers. But so this is experiment 1 with less social influence. This is experiment 2 with more. So we basically just sorted the songs by popularity. So what we found is more social influence. The more people look at what other people are doing, you might expect that this would help them find the best songs faster. But in fact, we find the opposite. This leads to more unpredictability, greater variability across these worlds, along with greater concentration. So you see more inequality of success. So it seems like these superstars must be somehow better. But if we could have rewound history, it could have been a very different superstar. Also, there's a particular relationship between quality and success that turned out to be interesting, which is that so the x-axis measures the appeal of the song, which is determined by people in the independent condition. The y-axis measures the success in the 8 social influence world. So like, here's one song, She Said by Parker Theory. That was the highest appeal song in the independent condition. And like, here are the 8 different outcomes it could have. So what you see in the data is you see a kind of a cone-shaped structure where the low appeal songs pretty much always do bad. But as the appeal increases, the range of outcomes increases. So when I was a grad student, I had this, I was doing this and ended up having a meeting with the head of research at NBC. And I was so excited because I was like, okay, this person really understands how this all works. Like so he's gonna explain it all to me. And then I went and met with him, and he's like, okay, tell me how this works. And I'm like, wait, no, you're supposed to know how it works. He's like, no, you're a grad student at Columbia. You should know how it works. But one of the things he said, which I thought was great, was he said, he looked at this graph, and he said, oh, I already knew that. And I was like, you did? That's amazing. What? And how did you know that? He's like, well, I can predict failure, but I can't predict success. And I thought that was a beautiful way of capturing this graph. If you can measure that a low appeal song, a song is low appeal, and then you know it's not going to do well. But once you cross a certain point, then really any kind of thing could happen. So I guess one thing about doing this experiment for me, while I was doing this, I was talking to lots of people actually in the music industry. And I was trying my best to like be out in the world talking about things. So I think a lot of sociology students think that like a lot of the ideas come from other papers. So like the way the paper is written, it looks like I was sitting in my office reading a bunch of papers and had this idea. But that is not how it happened. The unpredictability idea, that actually came from my barber. So just to be totally clear, so originally the way that we were thinking about it is, so the inequality, the superstar nature of these markets is very clear from the outside of the markets. And they also seem kind of arbitrary. Like, why Britney Spears and not, actually it was Norah Jones at the time. Why Norah Jones and not any of the very many other similar people? And so I was talking to my barber about it, and she, this being New York, she was like in the music industry also. And so she was explaining to me that it's not just arbitrary, it's very unpredictable even for the people in the industry. And everyone in the industry knows that no one knows. Like if you, and then I was like, really, that's cool. So then I found these papers that were about this, and that's where a lot of the framing came from, was from my barber. So I think in general, if you're doing stuff that's related to stuff that's happening in the world, it's really good to be out in the world talking to people about it. Okay. So let's talk about the free music here as an incentive, right? That means high fixed cost, because I had to get permission from the bands. I also prepared a report for each band. So I told them this is like free market research. So I gave them all that broken out by demographics and stuff. Because that was basically, we collected all the data, so might as well give it to them in an aggregated form. And so without free music, we would have had a different cost structure. One thing I will say about these high fixed cost strategies is they depend on being able to pay the high fixed cost. So like I was super lucky. Duncan Watts was my advisor. He had a bunch of grants. Peter Housel was like on staff, like ready to help build experiments. And he had experience already building a social science experiment because he had previously built the electronic small world experiment, which is another experiment that came out of Duncan Watts' group. So like that is a huge blessing to have this person there and available. So when I say like, oh, go for these high fixed cost, low variable cost strategies, that is not always an option. But if it is an option, it's something to at least consider. So that's a little bit about the Musiclab experiment, and using that as a way of thinking about creating these zero variable cost experiments that can run while you're sleeping and don't require you to pay anyone. Because you might say that sounds impossible to build an experiment like that, but it's not. It's possible. It's possible. Yeah.
Sorry, maybe my brain's not working or something. But why does the cost increase without free music?
Oh, because how are you going to incentivize people to do it?
So musicians, you mean?
No. The participants in the experiment. So like, why would people come to your website, listen to music, and rate it on a scale of 1 to 5 stars if they couldn't then download the music? So our main, well, I didn't really explain this very clearly. When we were recruiting people with ads, we were like, download free music. Which, as you pointed out, is not maybe the most attractive thing these days, or as Joshua pointed out, right? People have already free music. I still think you could do a website with free music and attract people. You would have to design it slightly differently, but I still think with the right design, it could be attractive. And you do have the benefit of saying this is a research study by, in our case, Columbia University. So it's like, get music from Columbia University. It gives you some way of separating yourself out from every other free music site. And like you'll notice we put the Columbia crown on there and we like pick the Columbia colors. We wanted to like emphasize that part of it. Actually, partially because at that time, like illegal downloading sites had a lot of like viruses and other kinds of weird stuff on it. And so we were like, we're not that. This is like a Columbia University. This music is going to be virus free. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I mean, I don't know if this is helpful, but in case anyone wants to pursue it, like
Yeah.
now on like a lot of the music industry is based on like social media popularity and stuff.
Mhm.
So there are now sites that basically will let you download music from semi-popular artists for free as long as you like follow them. Like you follow, it's like the site and it pops up and it says follow this band on Twitter and post about them on Facebook, and then you can download the song.
Cool.
And that's like a mechanism for now. That happens a lot.
Yeah. Here.
Yeah, I have the same question to you. So, yeah, cost and number of participation is different from the paying the money or not.
Yeah.
But I'm really concerned about the result also might be different from between that. For example, in your case, I would say that download rate, even though it's a free, it's very low, right?
Yes.
Even it's the most popular music.
Yes.
So I'm now convinced of this because you already know that in music industry have the same perspective, like unpredictability of the success.
Yeah.
So I think if I were you, I would be really convinced with my result of this
Yes.
graph.
Yeah.
But if I didn't know the like a purpose story,
Yeah.
I'm still okay. Maybe this result might come from among the low, very unpopular, weird music market.
Yep.
So it's still field experiment is great.
Yeah.
Simulate a realistic world.
Yeah.
But still, it's hard to create.
Sure.
You know.
Yeah. So I think there's a question about what can one extrapolate from this experiment. So to me, we talked about before saying a certain thing can happen versus saying a certain thing will happen. So I think this shows that this can happen. These histories can diverge. You can get very different outcomes, and we can demonstrate that very cleanly. And that by increasing the amount of social influence at the individual level, these histories diverge more. So I would say that is like a possibility result. Then there's the question about to what extent this matches onto actual music markets. And here I would say that the idea of choice overload, that there's tons of songs, way more songs than ever get listened to, that is totally a reasonable first order approximation of the markets for music.
And also the distribution of the quality
Yes.
much wider.
The distribution of, so I think there's two big parameters. One is there are more songs than anyone can listen to. That I think is totally reasonable. People only listen to a small fraction. The other, the distribution of the quality. And I would say our distribution of quality came from a naturally occurring source. So we could have done different. I can tell you one thing we were thinking about, which we never actually did, is we were going to get all this data, do a bunch of simulations, empirically calibrated simulations, and then run more experiments. Right? That was the long-term goal, and we kind of never did that. But then this starts to, right, these are just two experiments in the space of all possible experiments like this. And so it would be nice to know more about the variability. Subsequently, people have done stuff like that. Just a plug for making your data available. So after my dissertation was done, the data is available, and you can all go download it. It's documented. And people have used it subsequently. Like a lot of students use it for class, which is great. And then people have written papers about it. Someone has tried to do some of these empirically calibrated simulations. Other people have done more careful analysis of the individual choice behavior. So I think it's really nice to, once you're done with the data, I mean, to make it available to others, even I would say before you're done with it, but especially once you're done with it, it's great. Yeah?
So in that scenario, um, other than like being a nice guy, what's your incentive for sharing the data? Like, do you get a citation or?
Yeah, you get citations when people publish with it.
Yeah. Okay. So is that required? Like when you?
Well, because usually they say I got the data from this Musiclab experiment, and like they have to describe where the data comes from. I would say also, so that's an individual incentive. Another is like that's what science is. Like it's not about incentives. It's about like that's just what science is.
I guess just to push back, like practically.
It's not that easy.
Right.
Yeah, so guess what? Good news is it's much easier now than it used to be. So there's something called Dataverse. There are many, this is like a little bit of these, like there are many different ones and some people have very strong feelings. Dataverse is one. It is a very reasonable one. It comes out of IQSS from Gary King's group. And you can go there and post your data online and they will take care of it forever. They won't handle the service requests, but like they host it, it's backed up. It's not going to get lost when you move from one computer to the next computer to the next computer. And to post your data on Dataverse, it takes like 10 minutes of you filling out the appropriate metadata. So the barrier of making it available, it is true it takes some time to document, but that documentation is probably stuff you would want to be doing anyway. And it's a good thing. Get your work out there and make people use it. You get more citations. And I think people also have more confidence in your work. So we talked about pre-registration plans as a way to get people to build confidence in what you're doing. So in my talks, I usually end the talk, here's the papers, here are the replication materials. You can go and download all the data and code that we use to make those results. Do most people do that? Probably they don't, but it's a way of showing that you're not afraid of what you've done, which I think does build confidence. Yep.
Just as evidence of the points you're making, first of all, I've gained a lot from you having posted the data used it several times, so I appreciate that you posted it.
Thank you.
And in terms of getting confidence in the results, I had one project where we were like, I had a hypothesis that was like trying to poke holes in some of your experimental design. And like, when I actually looked at the data, I was like, wow, this experimental design is so thorough. Like, it actually gave me a lot more confidence in what you've done with it. So,
thank you.
You probably benefit at least to that extent.
Yeah.
I guess, can I clarify,
Yeah.
like my, I guess, what's the term? Lack of clarity. I guess I'm thinking about just the academy as an institution and the actual like tenure process and how much, so yes, academia talks about, reproducibility, so forth and so forth, but they in practice don't particularly care about it so much as you do whatever whatever it is they want you to do. So I guess I'm trying to figure out like how do you balance your own desires to be reproducible and to be open source with academia's like just put your head down and
Yeah, so I think a couple things. So one is I put it all on my CV. So I put on my CV the papers I have, and I put on my CV the data sets that I've created and made available. And I put on my CV all the open source projects that I've played a significant role in. Because like these are things that you've contributed to the academic community, and we can contribute more than just papers. So that's one thing. And I think the other thing is that is going to change. So I feel like that the way it is now is not sustainable. We are already seeing fields where this change is happening. And so if you have just a purely self-interested way of thinking about it is this change is coming. So I do it now and I get rewarded for being an innovator or someone who's like doing the right thing, or I wait until everyone else, it gets to this flipping point where it gets to the point where if you're not doing this, then you start to look shady. And so that point is starting to happen in certain fields. And so just do it now and you get credit for it, whereas instead of being forced to do it later. That's a pure self-interested way of looking at it. Yeah? Do you want to?
Yeah, just a really quick point on looking shady. So to me, like the polar opposite of the spectrum of what you've done in providing data is like Alice Goffman's book, right? Which will we can get into, right? Like the believability of that whole process. Like if you burn your field notes versus you post your data and somebody tries to like look into your experimental design, these are two very different things, and I'm more likely to believe one than the other.
Okay, well, I'd like to, after the live stream is off, I'd like to talk about that, but I would like to say also that there is a case that for certain kinds of information that cannot be anonymized. Remember, we've talked about the challenges of anonymization. So this is a real challenge. If you have data that can't be anonymized, how do you make it available to other people? I think there are a variety of intermediate steps where you could, for example, require the person to have IRB oversight or something like that. There is a in-between range that you can do other than just posting it online for everyone who wants it.
And there's a big debate in political science about this now, about especially qualitative data.
Yep.
And there are a bunch of flame wars about it. So if, maybe
Off the
during
live
lunch
stream.
we can.
But I think it is fair to say that you would have more confidence in research where you can see the underlying data than in research where you can't. I think that is kind of, we would all agree to that. And I think we would also all agree that there is some situations where you can't make the data available to every single person in the world. Then the question is how we navigate that.
I meant to say exactly the same
Okay.
thing. Working for government projects, you might not be able to do that, and more journals actually have the requirement of posting data and code to even be able to publish. And we're working on solutions because, again, having worked for the German government, where you just could not make the data available in Social Security data, so there was no way that was going to happen. We're going to have to find solutions, as you were saying, synthetic data, or I don't know what we could do.
Yep. So I want to say one. I want to say one last thing about. Oh, did anyone have any questions about? We've already talked about a bunch of this stuff. So I want to say one last thing about zero variable cost data. That you need to calculate the cost correctly.
Zero cost. It's pretty easy to calculate.
Well, let's see. So here is an example. So this is a field experiment about audit study to measure discrimination in academia. So you may wonder whether it's the case that professors are biased against certain groups of people. This is a very important thing to know in terms of it has important societal implications in the same way that other audit studies to measure discrimination have important implications. So these researchers sent out a bunch of emails that looked like this. Dear Professor Salganik, this is, by the way, they didn't actually send it to me, but this is the actual text of the email. Dear Professor Salganik, I'm writing you because I'm a prospective PhD student with considerable interest in your research, and I will be on campus today, and I know it's short notice. I'm wondering if you might have 10 minutes to talk with me. Thank you in advance for your consideration, Carlos Lopez. So for those of you who are social scientists, you can guess what's going on here, that they are varying the name of the student to signal their gender and ethnicity, and they also, maybe it is less clear, they are also varying the time window that this request is about.
10 minutes or.
No, today or next week.
Oh, okay.
So I think they were trying to get like fast decision making versus planned decision making or something like that. So what they found is that in immediate requests, like I'm going to be on campus today, there was very little difference in the response rate. So they actually have two outcomes. So whether you respond to the email or not, and then whether you say that you'll meet with the student or not. So which is nice to have multiple outcomes. The request is for today, they don't see a difference between Caucasian male students and other students. When the request is for later, they do see, this is 1 week later, they do see big differences based on the name.
What did they do when someone said that they accepted a meeting?
So then they write back and say, actually, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to meet with you. And they claim that they did this very quickly because they were concerned about, they wanted to be prompt in turning down the meeting. So then, again, because this is very low cost, they are able to do it with tons of different names. So heterogeneity is really cool. You may wonder how it varies based on the characteristic of the name being used. You can read the paper to see the results. But the important thing is, again, low cost. means you can do a lot more treatments, which is great scientifically. They also have some results where they know stuff about heterogeneity based on who the professor is. So what are the actual costs of this experiment, though? So from the perspective of the researchers, it is free. Like, hey, we're delivering this treatment over email. There's no cost. Isn't that awesome? We can do 6,000 of these emails. They did 6,000. They probably could have done 60,000, right? They could, and many of you in this room could write a bot to send out these emails. And you could send out 60,000 or 600,000. So in some ways, the cost is zero. But now you also realize that you might be one of the people getting this email, and you realize that the cost is not zero. The cost to the researcher is zero, but the cost is still a cost. You're imposing a cost on someone else. So maybe you're wasting 1 minute of this person's time, or 5 minutes. I mean, we could figure out 10 seconds. Maybe it's not even a big cost. But so it is not zero. It is just zero. It's not borne by you. So what is it that in economics they say, like, problems can happen when there are costs that you're not actually, what is it called, externalities? Yeah, like here's a situation where you have the possibility of pushing your costs onto other people by conscripting them to be in your experiment. So I want to be clear that when I talk about doing zero variable cost experiments, I mean zero variable cost total, not zero variable cost to you. Right? So the Musiclab, no one was conscripted to be in that. They chose to be in it. They wanted to be in it. So that is just, I feel like I have to clarify that distinction. And so please keep that in mind if you are trying to design these kinds of experiments. Yep?
So do you think of that as a problem with all, not audit studies, but
Yeah.
what are the ones where you mail the...
Resume studies? Yeah, I think it is an issue that these studies have to think about. I mean, these particular researchers, I want to be clear, I don't think what they were doing was outside of the norms of what we do. The reason why I picked this one is because we could all imagine getting that email. But when we have these like audit studies in the low-wage labor market, none of us in this room are like, oh, I could imagine like working in a warehouse and having to, you know, this is more relevant to us to realize there is a cost. So one of the things these researchers did that is, I think, really good, well, first, all of this was overseen by the IRB, which should go without saying, but given some of these online experiments, that is not always happening. Then, so they're complying with the rules. Second is they did do debriefing, and they got some heat because of the debriefing, which again is part of transparency-based accountability, right? They were willing to put their name on that debriefing email that they sent to a bunch of other professors. And in that email, they explain why they did it. And if you think back to these audit studies of discrimination, you know, the information is really valuable. It's hard to collect in any other way. The amount of burden on each particular person is relatively small. Now, the fourth that they use for these studies of employment is that it doesn't spoil the context. Here, I don't think there's as much of a context of deception in emails. We'll talk about that when the live stream is off, about deception in emails you get from students. But so I think like a lot of the reasoning that you could apply to studies of employment, you could apply to these experiments as well. And I think the fact that they did it openly and talked about why they did it is a really good thing. I think the value of this particular experiment is just to clarify the externalities involved.